All right, I suggest we begin. So, once again, good morning or good afternoon, depending on whereabouts in the world you are, and welcome to the first MLC Data Quality Initiative webinar. The agenda for today, we're going to just begin with a couple of introductions to the presenters. We're then going to talk about what the purpose of the DQI is, and essentially some of the design principles surrounding it in support of that purpose. We will then begin to dive into a bit more technical detail in terms of how you actually participate in the DQI and how you can go about delivering data to us. And then similarly, once you have delivered data to us, you will obviously want some data back. So we will talk a little bit about the format of that output as well. And then a very quick section on next steps. And then depending on how we're doing for time, hopefully some time for any questions that may arise. But before we dive in, I just want to make sure that everybody is attending the webinar that is sort of most helpful to them. Obviously, sort of the music publishing industry is a large one, and it has people both large and small, and with very different ways of running their publishing administration. So today's webinar is targeted mostly at, I would say, organizations that have typically perhaps their own in-house or proprietary IT system. So therefore, we are assuming some level of sort of technical knowledge and an ability to perhaps to be able to sort of manipulate data relatively easily in order to be able to deliver that data to us. If that doesn't, if that description doesn't resonate with you, don't worry. You are of course very welcome to stay with us for the duration. But it may be that actually you may get more value out of one of the other two webinars. So next Wednesday we have a webinar specifically targeted at clients or users of Vistex Music Maestro platform. Vistex have been working with us for a few weeks now, a few months now on making sure that their users can participate in the DQI. So if you are a Music Maestro user, it may be that next Wednesday's webinar is a better one for you. Or finally, if you are perhaps shall I say, less technically sophisticated, perhaps you're using something like Excel or Google Sheets to store your data. Again, the first half of the webinar, I would say, will probably be broadly similar, but the second part in terms of the technical detail, I think will be different. And so if that third category sort of describes you better, it may be that you get more value out of attending that one. As I say, of course, everybody is very welcome to stay. But I just want to try and help route people to the right place. I also, if you will allow me, want to do a very quick plug for another series of webinars that the MLC will be launching next month. A couple of colleagues of mine will be doing those, in particular a webinar series sort of targeted at self-administered songwriters. More information will be available on that as and when we have it. Please sign up to our mailing list at themlc.com if you would like more information on that. So moving through introductions, my name is Rich Thompson. I am the CIO of the MLC, and I've been working with the MLC for about 18 months at this point, even before we were designated. Joining me presenting today is a colleague of mine, Raphael, who is working on a number of technical items within the MLC, of which the Data Quality Initiative is possibly the most important and probably the one that's occupying the most of his time. as we sort of continue to ramp it up and as it continues to gather steam. So I will hand over to Raf as and when we get to the technical details in a couple of sections' time. The best place to reach us is simply at data.quality@themlc.com. There are a few people that monitor that mailbox, so that is the best way to get a quick response from a member of the data quality team. So, with the preamble over, let's dive into the DQI proper, and I think starting with, if you like, the purpose of the DQI and what we might term sort of the elevator pitch. And fundamentally, I would suggest that one of the key roles of any publisher or administrator or somebody administering a catalogue of musical works is to make sure that those works are correctly registered at the societies or the collective management organisations at which they represent the works. So the DQI is fundamentally designed to answer the question, are my works correctly registered? And to, you know, hopefully give comfort to people that either they are, or if they're not, to help them understand why not. And we can break down the question of are my works correctly registered in a number of ways, and this is far from an exhaustive list. But, you know, perhaps the first and most important question is the payable percentage correct? If my belief is that I control or represent 75% of a work, does the MLC database say that I represent 75% of a work? So, you know, that's one dimension of checking whether the work is correctly registered. Similarly, you can ask lots of other questions. Are all of the writers listed? Is the ISWC present? And so on and so on. This is not at all intended to be an exhaustive list of questions. But effectively some of the sort of top questions that motivated us to create the DQI in the first place. So in order to check whether those works are correctly registered, the DQI exists effectively to give you a streamlined, a mass, a bulk, whatever you want to call it, way to compare the data that you hold on your works with the data that the MLC holds on your works, and then critically to give you a report highlighting any discrepancies that exist between those two data sets. And this is a pretty key principle. So what I can do, or what we can do, or what the DQI can do is tell you that, you know, to my earlier example, that if your database says that, you know, for example, as a publisher, you think you represent 75% of the work, but the MLC database says it thinks you represent 50% of the work, there is clearly a discrepancy there. But what we cannot do is tell you which of those views of the truth is correct. It might be that one of them is correct. It might actually be that neither of them are correct. So sort of something I want to sort of highlight as a key principle really from the start is what we do is tell you where the discrepancies are, but you will need to put some effort in, and you will see the MLC using this tagline, play your part. You do need to play your part in helping us fix the discrepancies. So that might mean resending some work registrations, that might mean checking on the status of some letters of direction, that might mean solving some disputes or duplicate claims. But you know, we can help you find the problems, but we unfortunately you know, cannot fix them for you. So we do need you to play your part. So let me talk a little bit about sort of the approach to that we take. The first key thing when we were sort of designing the DQI and how it would work is that it is intended to work at scale. So if we think about some of the largest publishers and administrators, they represent catalogues of millions of works. So immediately that demands a methodology that works on a sort of computer to computer basis. You cannot check millions of works by hand. and equally, you need to be able to check them fairly quickly. So sort of before today, we have been sort of running a pilot phase of the DQI with a selected few publishers. And we have successfully run files of 1 million works, and that takes slightly less than 8 hours to run. So the first thing I would say is do not be afraid to throw volume at the DQI. If you have large catalogues, that is not a problem at all. We can handle that. But equally, flexibility is a key aspect. So whilst in the pilot phase, some of our pilot users did send their entire catalogue of upwards of 1 million works. Some other people took a different approach. Because any discrepancies do need to generally be investigated manually, some publishers said, you know what, we'll just send our top 10% of catalogue or our top 20% of catalogue. You know, and that is their sort of reasonable commercial and operational decision to take. There was one other publisher that had recently acquired a catalogue, had shifted it via letter of direction, and wanted to make sure that that shift had worked correctly. So again, a different use case there that made sense to that particular publisher in the context of what their business had been doing at the moment in time. So they sent us a data file for just that new catalogue that they'd acquired. We sent them a response file, and then they started working through the response file to understand the discrepancies that it highlighted and to fix them as appropriate. So different options for, you know, how you would like to engage with the DQI. Another key principle is that it's very much intended to be repeatable. It sort of comes with the scalable point that it is also quite heavily automated. So, you know, we would strongly encourage people that participate to sort of keep checking their catalogues. Once you have done the, frankly, relatively small amount of work to sort of integrate with the DQI, there is no reason, I would suggest, why you can't, you know, continue to run the files through it and get the benefit of the discrepancy report that comes back. And similarly, you know, I spoke on the previous slide about some publishers that have sent us in excess of 1 million works. What they are doing is going through a series of iterations. So we send them a discrepancy report back, they go through and knock issues out, fix issues, and then they submit again. And each time the list of issues should get smaller and smaller and smaller. So, you know, where you have a larger catalogue, an iterative approach probably makes a lot of sense in terms of sort of how to engage with the DQI. And I would also add that at least one publisher in the pilot phase is now sort of building this into their permanent workflow. So they send CWI registrations to HFA, they get the acknowledgement back, and then I think about 3 or 4 weeks after the acknowledgement, as a double check of that acknowledgement, they are then submitting a file to us, to the DQI, to you know, to absolutely confirm that the information that they got back was correct, and that they can be as confident as they can be that the registration worked as intended, or perhaps didn't work as intended, you know, in which case they would get a discrepancy flagged to them for investigation. And similarly, you know, so long as people are getting value from the DQI, it will continue to be available. So, you know, it is designed for the long term. And as I say, which is why, you know, we would encourage people to sort of build it into their workflows in terms of, as I say, sort of a double check on that CWR acknowledgement for people using CWR. So, yeah, repeatable is a key aspect. Raf will talk a little bit more about the sort of technological side in a minute. But another key sort of design principle was that we wanted the DQI to be accessible by as many people as possible. So, you know, whether that be people with their own technology systems, people using third-party technology systems, as I said earlier, We've been working with Vistex on their Music MISO platform, but we are in conversations, in active conversations with a number of other platform providers to understand how we might be able to build DQI functionality into their platforms as well. But also, anybody that is managing data in Excel or Google Sheets or any sort of similar software packages, we want them to be able to participate as well. So accessibility is sort of a key point for us. And the consequence of that, as Raf will explain in more detail, is we very intentionally use very simple technology choices. It is not a complicated thing to participate in. It is not a complicated XML or JSON schema using the latest web services and APIs and all that sort of stuff. It is very intentionally quite simple, so that as many people could participate as easily as possible. And then another key principle is that an initiative calling itself a data quality initiative has got to be accurate. There is no point us passing back to you data that does not represent the state of the data as it exists in the HFA/MLC database. So as a consequence of that, we do no string matching. So we rely exclusively on two work identifiers. The first is the HFA/MLC song code. That is one and the same identifier. Or we can also use an ISWC, the International Standard Work Code. So for the most part, those are the two identifiers that we use to match the works in your catalogue, in your system, in your database, to the works that are contained in the HFA/MLC database. That is the best way, in our view, to guarantee the accuracy of the information that we are returning to you. If we had attempted to build some sort of string matching or some fuzzy logic or something like that to do the matching, that would have introduced an error rate of its own, and I think that would probably have undermined the confidence that we hope we will build in the DQI as we move forward. So hopefully that sort of makes sense to everybody as a concept. And then I think sort of finally, in terms of our design principles, we turn to the output report. And a key principle of this, if you like, is that the information that we want to provide back to you has got to be actionable. It's got to be information you can do something with. So again, Raf will provide a little bit more detail, but the output report is something that can be opened by a member of staff at a publisher or administrator or CMO, or even or by a self-administered songwriter, or anybody who is looking after a catalogue, and they should be able to look at that and understand pretty easily what the discrepancy is and what their view was in the file that they supplied to us, and what the MLC view was in the MLC's database. So yeah, the key word there is actionable. We very much want the information to be actionable, but also, again, knowing that we have some different target audiences that will participate in the DQI. The report is designed, it's a tab delimited report, which is designed to be both readable by a computer, but also openable in Excel. So again, if you are an administrator with millions and millions of works, the chances are you are going to ingest it in its tab delimited form and process it that way. If you are somebody that's managing a catalogue in Excel, you're probably going to open it in Excel and use the filter function to interact with it that way. But either are perfectly possible in terms of working through the discrepancies that it highlights to you. Before I hand over to Raf, I just want to make one final note, just for fear of any confusion. So submissions to the DQI are absolutely not a work registration. They are a request for comparison between your data and the MLC data. So my expectation is that Many of the people on this call who are sort of people generally with their own technology systems will either be using CWR, Common Works registration, or perhaps some sort of Excel template. So in order to register works, you need to, you will, at least in the short term, continue to do that in the same way as you are doing today. The DQI is not a work registration. So just wanted to emphasize that to make sure that was clear. So at this point, I will hand over to my colleague, Raphael, who will take you through some of the more technical details. Over to you, Raf.
Hi, everybody. So as Richard's explained a few times already, we have intentionally kept the format very simple. We want it to be really accessible, easy to understand, and easy to implement. Whatever your capabilities, whatever your system. It also only requires data that is widely available in any such system. So nothing out of the ordinary. Typical stuff. And before I dive into the details into great length, there is a PDF version of the technical specification available. Just reach out to us on data.quality@vmlc.com and we will be able to send you a copy. Next slide. Yes, thank you. The format consists of groups of 3 files, and I'll explain a bit later what groups mean in that context, but essentially you will need to provide a work information file, a work alternative titles file, and a writer information file. The technical requirements around those files are fairly standard as well. So the character encoding is UTF-8 to make sure that we cover not just Latin characters, but Cyrillic characters. During the pilot test, we received Japanese characters, for example, or we received Hebrew characters as well. So we want to be able to read those characters as well as possible. Next thing is the file needs to be in tab separated values format. This was intentionally chosen over CSV because we think it just works better as an international standard. And as you'll see, it'll make more sense in a minute, but we need the headers for a header row with the column names. And this helps us read the data accurately. And finally, fields do not have a maximum length. That's one of the benefits of using a TSV or separated value standard. This is the work file. As part of the delivery of the data, you will need to deliver 1 work per row. And this file is the only file that is mandatory as part of the delivery. And as you can see, the fields that are required are fairly generic. So we will require your work ID so that we can report back on your work IDs, HFA tune codes, and so /MLC tune codes. They are interchangeable for now. You can provide as many as you hold in your system, and we strongly encourage that you do. That way we increase our chances of finding your works in the database. ISWCs, similarly, as many as you hold in your system. Again, this increases our chance of hitting your works. And then collection chair, primary title, writer names, which are all standard metadata, which helps us with the comparison against the HFA database. Finally, we've added a priority indicator so that you can flag some work that you might want to be returned in the output files as a priority. what I would recommend is not to send everything as a priority, because then nothing becomes a priority. But what we found is that because the process is so fast, we can actually return everything in less than 24 hours. So flag anything as priority, but you will return, you will get everything back pretty quickly, I think. But next slide, please. This is the writer file, and again, you will need to indicate one writer per row, whether they're controlled or not. And again, having all the writers is helpful to make sure that we return an accurate view and an accurate report on the data that we're matching against. And again, the fields are pretty standard. So we have a work ID to make sure that we can link back those writers to the correct composition. Writer given name or forename, the writer family name, and then an IPI name number. And you will notice that the IPI name number isn't mandatory, but again, it's very useful. It is one of the things that we check against, and if you have them, please supply them. And finally, the alternative title file. Again, this file is optional, but it is still useful for us to have it. And it's clearly very simple, one work ID and one alternative title. So now that you know what the files look like, you might want to know how to deliver them. So we have two methods of delivery for the files. One which is via SFTP, which is the preferred way, and another via email. We have a different email address that we can supply when we set you up. For large submissions, for example, larger than 10,000 works, we really recommend using SFTP because those deliveries are going to be quite voluminous. So they might not actually fit into an email system. But also we really recommend breaking them down, breaking down the works in batches of roughly 10,000 works per file. That allows us actually to process the data much quicker and more easily. Next slide, please, Rich. So file naming. Each group of file needs to be grouped by date and time. This allows us to make sure that all files are processed together, so we know which writers belong to which work. So for example, if a file was generated on the 11th of February at 15:45, then all the files corresponding to that timestamp would have the same timestamp at the beginning of the name. This is especially useful if you're delivering multiple group of files at the same time, multiple batches as specified before. This allows us to make sure that the data is processed correctly. Equally, for large deliveries, all the files can be zipped together into a compressed file, especially if you are wanting to email them. And again, just use a timestamp in your zip file so we know that they all belong together. So for example, if the previous group of files that we spoke about earlier was zipped together, you would use the 2020-0211 for the file name. So now that we've spoken about how you deliver your files, you might want to know what you're going to get back. The output reports consist of a group of two files. One which is a summary report, which lists all the issues that we've detected and how many of each issues occurred. And a detailed report, which lists the issues that have been detected, but also some additional information that could help with the resolution of those issues. So again, we're not trying to resolve the issues for you. We don't have enough information to do that, and you're usually best placed to do that because you know your catalog better than we do, or that we will ever will. But we want to provide you with as much information as we can to help you with that resolution. And again, the technical format of the file is really simple. It's computer readable. It's again in tab delimited format. And that means that it can be easily read by a computer, so you can ingest it into your database and then process it at your leisure. But it can also be opened in Excel and reviewed by a human being, really. So some of the key issues that we report on, and this list is really non-exhaustive. We have more things that we can keep track of, and we are very much open to suggestions. So anything that is useful to you, we can discuss it and we can try to implement it. But going back to the key data points that Richard mentioned to make sure that your registrations are properly captured in the database. So we're keeping track of the collection shares and making sure that they match. And we're breaking that down by whether the HFA share is 0, which usually means that it's non-existent, so a bad registration. Similarly, if the HFA share is greater than the share supplied, or if the supplied share is greater than the HFA share, this can point to a number of issues ranging from an LD not being processed to a duplicate claim waiting to be resolved. We're also tracking the number of writers, which could lead to collection shares not being correct, but also a number of issues. We keep track of identifiers and making sure that they're formatted correctly. So, for example, IPI name numbers or SWCs. We're also making sure that the HFA/MLC song codes are properly formatted. So we also, as I said, we try to be helpful and provide data whenever we can. So some to help you resolve issues, but also to augment your database. So we can supply HFA or MLC song codes when we have them, and we can supply ISWCs when we have them as well. Sorry, I was one slide ahead.
Sorry.
That's fine. So again, as I said, we supply data to augment your databases, and we can also indicate whether they're archived or preferred ISWCs or archived or preferred MLC song code. And back to you, Rich.
Thank you. So, firstly, just to echo the point that Raf made, in many ways, you know, I say we've been through sort of a pilot stage of the DQI, and we have gathered from some feedback from the early users of it. But equally, we are sure that as more people begin to use it, they will have other thoughts and other suggestions and other feedback, and we definitely welcome that. We want to make the DQI as useful as it can possibly be to its users. So if you have any suggestions for other data points that we can check, or more useful ways to format the output, or anything of those sorts, those bits of feedback, those suggestions would be welcome. So please do feedback to us. How do you do that? How do you play your part? Well, it's the same email address. You know, we are happy to answer any questions, of which we know that there will be some. If you are happy with everything you've seen and heard today, and are just desperate to get cracking and are already hitting your database to start pulling the data, and you're ready to start testing, again, drop us a line. There is a small amount of setup that we will need to do. it is fairly straightforward. Mostly what we just need to do is make sure that we know which what HFA calls the top publishers. We just need to set up the DQI so it knows which top publishers you are within the HFA database. And that's generally about it in terms of, and then SFTP setup. Or again, if you've got any feedback, comments, questions, that is the best place to reach us. As I say, multiple people monitor that email box, so that is the best way to get a quick and accurate response from us. So I would encourage you to use it. That sort of marks the end of the content that we have prepared. Let me, and I will admit I'm looking at this for the first time. So let me try and see what questions we have had asked. So there is one gentleman who says, with the details provided on interested parties, will the DQI require identifiers for all interested parties for matching, whether controlled or uncontrolled? I would say no, we do not require them, but we would encourage them. They are helpful to us in a number of ways. Not only will we validate them for you, but it actually helps us do a number of other things in terms of identification of works, in terms of sort of identification of parties, and it helps us sort of populate some data structures that sort of help us build a feedback mechanism effectively. So no, the identifiers are not required, but strongly encouraged. Another gentleman, Raf, do you want to ask the question about the availability of the webinar?
Yes, no, I click on the answer thinking that I could type the answer in the chat, but failed miserably. So yes, there are a couple of other webinars that we're planning, but if you think this one was specifically more relevant to you because you have a custom built system, there will be a recording available and we can share that with you. So this is also an option.
Again, I would email us at data.quality@themlc.com when we have finished, and we can arrange for you to get access to the recording. We have a question about writer pseudonyms and misspellings, and whether those are something that we can deal with. Because we sort of rely pretty much exclusively on identifier matching, sort of misspellings and pseudonyms are a problem that we sort of try to neatly sidestep by doing identifier to identifier matching. That, at least as the DQI presently works, eliminates the need for us to do any sort of complicated matching on pseudonyms or the 47 spellings of Tchaikovsky, or what have you. Yeah, so pseudonyms and misspellings don't cause us a particular issue. Just bear with us a second, the questions are coming in. So there's a question, so to confirm, the DQI report is returned to the publisher, and then what exactly is best practice to submit corrections? Is it via CWR, or will there be portal interaction required? So to break that question down into its parts, yes, so the DQI report is returned to the person that submitted the file to us. Of course, anybody that gets a DQI output file would be free to share it with anybody that they wish. But yes, it is certainly returned to the person that supplied the input file to us. And generally speaking, we would expect that to be the publisher or administrator or whoever is actively representing that catalogue. Not exclusively, but generally that is who we would expect to be submitting files to the DQI. With regard to, oh, and the question, where's the question? The question just vanished. I think the next part of the question was about corrections, or how best to correct the data. And that is that's a slightly difficult answer to give in two dimensions. Firstly, obviously different publishers work in different ways and have different what ways of sort of currently lodging their works with HFA. So I suspect for anybody working at any sort of a volume, CWR is probably the best way to go. But equally, I think experience during the pilot phase has suggested that there are alternative approaches that sometimes actually yield better results than just sort of resending all of the work through CWR. So in particular, what people in the pilot phase found was that by going through and spot checking a number of works through the output file, quite often that unearthed a problem at the catalogue level. So particularly, I recall one publisher sort of filtered their output report and said, show me everything where the HFA/MLC share is 0. And that helped them unearth some catalogue shifts that hadn't quite happened as they would have liked. And for whatever reason. So in that regard, just resending the works via CWR may not actually have been the smartest move. It is, the people in the pilot phase, I think, have definitely found it is worth the investment of having somebody go through the report manually and spot check 20, 30, 40, 50% of the issues. And that will tend to unearth, as I say, some broader issues that then can often just be fixed. And you can potentially fix hundreds of works, hundreds of discrepancies with one action. So it is worth sort of looking at the output report, I think, through that lens and through the lens of trying to be a little bit tactical about how you process it. I hope that answered that. Oh, and then there was then a question about CWR or portal interaction, and again, I think that is down to how specific people want to work. As I say, many publishers and administrators are registering via CWR, but there is no need or reason why that needs to be the exclusive way that they register works. If people want to come onto the MLC's portal and amend works there, then of course we would be delighted to accept the amendments there as well. So each publisher administrator sort of needs to take whatever decision is right for them in terms of their own processes and their own workflows. So I don't feel there is really a sort of a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. So I think whatever works best for you is the best way to handle that. Raf, there's a question about SFTP. Do you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, the short answer is to drop us a line at data.quality@dmlc.com and we can set you up. But the slightly longer answer is we're using SSH keys for authentication. So you would need to generate, if you don't have one already, generate an SSH key from your system and email us the public key so that we can add it to our server and make sure you can get authenticated on our SFTP server. Then we'll obviously provide you all the details that you need to log in onto the server, but it's about it really. It's a standard SFTP setup.
Thanks, Raf. There are sort of 2 or 3 questions on here about sort of bulk access to data, which I will sort of try and, rather than answer them specifically, I will sort of try and answer in the round. The MMA statute requires that the MLC make its database of musical works available to the public. And it requires that in two forms. Firstly, it requires access through a web browser. So in much the same way that sort of ASCAP and BMI have their online repertoire searches available, the MLC are hard at work building a sort of comparable interface into the MLC's database. So there will be a sort of public web search available. Actually, I would say in the not too distant future. We're a few weeks away, but yeah, in the not too distant future, that public web search will be available. The MMA statute also requires a second form of making the data available, and that is effectively making the data available en masse to people that would like to consume it, if you like, in a computer readable format. So if you like, the web browser is obviously a sort of a human readable interface. What we are also working on at the moment is a sort of lightweight database schema via which all of the data in the MLC's musical works database will be made available to the public. That will, we are very much hoping that will be available at the end of the year, as we roll into next year, basically when the sort of the MMA statute kicks in, effectively what the statute calls the license availability date, which is the 1st of January. So that is approximately when we are targeting at the moment to make that data available. I use the word targeting because that is very much what we are sort of hoping and aiming for. But I'm not making a guarantee that it will definitely be available then. But if not on the 1st of January, as soon after that as we can possibly achieve. So yeah, so I hope that answers the questions. The entire MLC database will be available to anybody that wants it. I suppose I should add, we are required by the law to charge for that on a marginal cost basis. So you will, unless you are a DSP, they get free access to it. But if you are a publisher or a label or a metadated company or any other interested party, you are very welcome to come and get a copy of that database. You will need to just pay a sort of what we hope will be a very modest amount of money just to cover the cost of making that data available. Hopefully that answered the sort of 2 or 3 questions in that area. Let me go back now to the questions. And Raf, if you see any.
I spotted a couple of questions around ISRC. So we mentioned ISWC a couple of times, and it's fair to say that it goes hand in hand with ISRC. So the one thing that I would say is the DQI focuses primarily on composition and on work data. ISRC is the identifier for recordings. So that's why we're not really mentioning throughout the presentation, or we're not really using it in the DQI. We don't know enough yet to understand what would be useful in the context of the DQI to do with recordings. So if people have suggestion for what would be useful, again, please reach out to us and we can explore things. Today our understanding is more focused on compositions, but that's a for now thing.
Absolutely. So yeah, just to emphasize, there may vary, if there is demand and people think it's useful, we can sort of definitely look at a second phase that encompasses some recording data. We don't yet, I think, have clarity on how that would best function for people. And also, I think there was a little bit of us wanting to sort of manage the scope a little bit of what we were doing on and begin by focusing on the composition data and getting that polished. And then, we are, after all, over 6 months away from this data being used in anger for the first time. So, people have plenty of runway to participate in the DQI, albeit we would strongly encourage you to start the process now. But yeah, if there is sufficient demand for us to, find a helpful way to incorporate recording data, then that is definitely something that we can take a look at. Sorry, we've got quite a few questions, so just trying to find the ones that are most helpfully answered. Actually, and time is upon us, so let me just try and find one more. So there is another question about works in conflict, and will that be handled within the portal? Yes, but not in the initial versions of the portal. So the initial versions of the portal, I think we have sort of publicly said we expect the first version of the portal to be available in the 3rd quarter of this year, hopefully. But that first version is very much focused, as the DQI is, on sort of composition data and allowing people to look at the data on their works, make sure the data on their works is accurate, submit any amendments as necessary. Yes, that first version of the portal will not include any functionality on disputes and overclaims, but future versions of the portal most definitely will. I can't give you an exact timeline for that at the moment, because it is something we are still in the process of figuring out. But in the coming weeks and months, we will obviously get greater clarity on that, so we will be able to let people know that functionality is coming as and when it's coming. So there are a few questions I haven't got to. We haven't got to. My apologies for that. But please do email us, and we will endeavour to answer any questions that we didn't get to just as soon as we can. I hope this was useful for everybody. I hope at least some of you have think that there is value in participating in the DQI and understanding the discrepancies in your catalogue, and then to begin to work on cleaning them up. We very much want to help you with that endeavour. Yes, I think that's probably a good place to leave it for today. Thank you all very much for your time. Thank you for listening. Hope it was an hour well spent. Thank you, Raf, as well.
And thank you for attending.